So last night we talked about the upper room and the things that went on in the upper room. Shortly after his dinner that night, he was arrested, betrayed by Judas Iscariot, taken into the prison system or so, the trial system, and he was beaten through the night. He was mocked. He was blasphemed. But then, according to Luke, it says when daylight came, after Jesus endured this all night, it says when daylight came, the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the scribes, convened and brought him before their Sanhedrin. They said, "If you are the Messiah, then tell us." And he said to them, "If I do tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." They all asked him, "Are you then the Son of God?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." "Why do we need any more testimony?" they said, "since we've heard it ourselves from his mouth." Then their whole assembly rose up and brought him before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man subverting our nation, opposing a payment of taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, the King." And so Pilate asked him, "Are you King of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "You have said it." Pilate then told the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no grounds for charging this man." But they kept insisting. "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee, where he started, even all the way to here." When Pilate heard this, he asked if the man was a Galilean. Finding that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem during those days. Herod was very glad to see Jesus. For a long time, he had wanted to see him because he had heard about him and was hoping to see some miracle performed by him. So he kept asking him questions, but Jesus did not answer him. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt. They mocked him, they dressed him in a brilliant robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Previously, they had been hostile toward each other. Pilate then called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You have brought me this man as someone who subverts the people. But in fact, after examining him in your presence, I have found no grounds to charge this man with the things you accuse him of. Neither has Herod, because he sent him back to us. So clearly, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will have him whipped and then release him. For according to the festival, he had to release someone to them." Then they all cried out together, "Take this man away! Release Barabbas to us!" He had been thrown into prison for a rebellion that had taken place in the city and for murder. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again. But they kept shouting, "Crucify! Crucify him!" A third time Pilate said to them, "Why? What has this man done wrong? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him whipped and then release him." But they kept up the pressure, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified, and their voices won out. So Pilate decided to grant their demand and release the one they were asking for, who had been thrown into prison for rebellion and murder. But he handed Jesus over to their will. As they led him away, they seized Simon, a Cyrenian, who was coming in from the country, and laid the cross on him to carry behind Jesus. A large crowd of people followed him, including women who were mourning and lamenting him. But turning to them, Jesus said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and your children. Look, the days are coming when they will say, 'The women without children, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed are fortunate.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things, then when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" 2 others, criminals, were also led away to be executed with him. When they arrived at the place called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there, along with the criminals, one on the right and one on the left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they are doing." And they divided his clothes, and they cast lots. The people stood watching, and even the leaders kept scoffing. "He saved others. Let him save himself, if this is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him. They came offering him sour wine, and they said, "If you are the king of the Jews, then save yourself." An inscription was above him, "This is the King of the Jews." Then one of the criminals hanging there began to yell insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and save us." But the other answered, rebuking him, "Don't you even fear God, since you are undergoing the same punishment? We are punished justly because we're getting back what we deserve for the things we did, but this man has done nothing wrong." And then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, "I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3, because the sun's light failed. The curtain of the sanctuary was split down the middle, and Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I entrust my spirit." And saying this, he breathed his last. When I focus on the cross of Christ, I have a hard time not getting emotional. As everybody was getting seated tonight, I had more than one person ask me about the picture on the altar tonight, the picture of Christ, and I assured everybody that I will tell the story. I told y'all the story back around, actually it was on All Saints Day, about how I was walking down this path and it was bricks, and as I was walking down this path, I was thinking about all the saints that have gone before me, and I told you that story, but what I didn't tell you was the end of that story. That pathway I was walking down at Glen Lake, it led me to this amphitheater, this outdoor amphitheater, and right in the middle of that amphitheater is a cross, huge cross, probably about 4 times bigger than the one we have outside, and it's just standing there all alone, surrounded by this amphitheater, and I sat down. And I looked at that cross, and I just started weeping, thinking about everything what that cross means about salvation and sanctification and being able to talk to God and to pray and to just search all these things out and to know God because of the cross of Calvary. And I had, I guess, what you would call a vision. And I started writing down as things were playing in my mind, like a daydream or a vision, and I wrote it down as fast as I could. But I could just picture myself standing there, knowing that he's innocent, knowing that he's dying for me in my place. And I wanted to stop the soldiers. I wanted them to stop. I wanted them to stop driving the nails. I wanted them to just leave him alone. He's an innocent man. And I scuffled with one of them in this vision. I scuffled with one. I had to break free. I wanted to be at the cross of Christ. And I got to the bottom of the cross and I grabbed it with all I could. And Jesus' blood was dripping on me. And I look up at him hanging on the cross, and I could see the sun over his shoulder shining, partially covered, you know. And he looked down at me and he smiled. And I couldn't walk away from that the same, you know? Luckily, I have a stepdad who's a great artist, and I gave him my notes that I scribbled out very badly, and he had to get me to decipher a lot of it. I gave him my notes, and we talked about it, and it took him the better part of a year to recreate my vision of me at the foot of the cross. Jesus smiling at me, letting me know that he's dying for me, letting me know that he has got this under control and that it's going to be okay, letting me know that I can be forgiven when I repent, letting me know that sin does not have to stop me from knowing who he is. Think about that day, and I can't help but get weepy again when I think about the vision, you know. My dad got this for me. I've had it for a few months. I think he gave it to me at Thanksgiving, and it's been hanging over my desk ever since. And anytime I'm in my office and I have moments where I'm just floored, and I get mad or I get frustrated because I'm doing schoolwork or something, or I just need a break for a minute. I have gotten to where I just lean back in my chair and I look up at that picture and I think, it's going to be okay. Jesus has died for me. I have been forgiven. I have been set free. I have been seized by the power of a great affection. And I'm okay because he loves me. He loves me enough that he wants me to be with him. And he hates sin enough that he was willing to pay the price. You know, we all do things that we think are going to be okay, but we know deep down that they're not. We all do things that we might think aren't okay, but we do them anyway. We all act out in different ways, in different forms and fashions, and we act against the cross as if we can erase what he has done through our actions sometimes. But we can't. Because he died for us. He changed everything in that moment, hanging on that tree. The Bible says, cursed is anything that hangs on a tree. That's in the books of the law. God himself told Moses, anything that hangs on a tree is cursed. And so guess what? When Jesus comes to redeem us, he's hanging on a tree. Cursed for us. Taking on our sin. Taking on those things that bind us, that bind us in a way that allows for no freedom. Taking on those things that we think that we can't get away from. Jesus took it all on when he took it on the cross. And I bet those soldiers had no idea that as they were nailing him to that cross, that each pounding of that nail meant something. Like Jesus said that lust and murder, they start in the heart. And so when they nailed it down, that one's for lust and murder. That's for violating the Sabbath and not taking the rest that we need. That one's for dishonoring our parents. That one's for stealing and lying. That one's for arguing. And that one's for being judgmental. That one's for fits of rage and anger. That one's for foolish talking. That one's for drunkenness. That one's for drug abuse. That one's for sexual immorality. That one's for rebellion, which the Bible calls witchcraft. That one's for hatred. That one's for false worship. That one's for idolatry. That one's for coarse joking. That's for every wrongdoing. Every wrongdoing. That's what the Bible calls sin. And each pounding of the nail, Jesus took that on.